people have a very strong reaction when this idea is brought up that plants could have intelligence.
We keep forgetting that we might very probably be wrong as to what human intelligence consists of. Let's see, what is it that unites us all in the tree of life? It's like the master key. Plants are seated, they don't need to be sentient. That was the Dalai Lama's approach, which means to me that was very informative because I understood that our prejudices, our biases go way deeper.
We have trouble thinking of it as nested instead of as linear.
What we share is regularities on planet Earth. The sun sets and the sun rises for any form of life. That's news, that's information to any form of life whatsoever. Bacteria swimming up a chemical gradient is generating those energy flows.
Yeah,
Plants
and that
growing,
interaction is the intelligence, right?
that's it. That's it. Intelligence is flesh and bone. It has to do with biology, not with following a recipe book. We're navel gazing, and we need to rethink everything, root and branch, like
Yeah.
get started from square one because we are just not getting it. This is not against anyone. This is against ignorance. This is all of us teaming up together against ignorance. That's what propels science. Love speaks the language of molecules. Can you truly appreciate that tree or that plant you are walking by or encountering in itself, for itself, detached from your needs? Nothing evolves without somebody else co-evolving. So everything is co-evolution. Science, if it's not reductionist or mechanistic, already has the resources to feel the awe, the wonder.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Love and Philosophy. Today we are going to talk about something that is incredibly interesting, plant cognition. And if you think you understand what that means, maybe you do, but maybe you don't. Give it a try. If it turns you off, definitely listen to this. If it turns you on, definitely listen to this. It's with Paco Calvo, who's written a wonderful book called Planta Sapiens. It's very easy to read, but it's also just a really good book. Paco is a renowned cognitive scientist. He's a philosopher, too, of biology. He's known for his groundbreaking research in plant cognition and intelligence, and he does that in Murcia. Sorry if I say that wrong. He tries to teach me at the beginning how to say it, you'll hear as we're coming on, but I still struggle. But Murcia in Spain, where Paco leads the MINT lab, which stands for Minimal Intelligence Lab. And he focuses on what that might mean, minimal cognition. There are lots of different studies about that, but he does a lot of interdisciplinary work between the cognitive sciences and biology. And he's very interested in plant behavior, plant problem solving, decision making. Again, if all of that sounds strange to you, if you're coming from human based studies of those sorts of things, then I think this might be really interesting, and his book as well. He's looking at the complex interactions and adaptive responses that plants exhibit, more or less. And he's really contributed to how we talk about and think about this word cognition and intelligence, which, as you know, is something that's definitely part of this whole idea of navigability. What is really wonderful about this conversation is that we talk about rethinking cognition, rethinking what intelligence means. We talk about Darwin, why Paco loves him so much. Darwin laying in bed sick, watching his plants, and how that leads to so many insights. And just that idea of observation with presence, what that means. Paco tells this great story about the Dalai Lama, or Dalai Lama. I also probably say that wrong, Dalai Lama. When Paco was on his book tour and there was a reception that he had with the Dalai Lama, and he sort of just assumed that they would be on agreement about life being intelligent, and you'll hear that he was a little bit wrong about that, which is very interesting. Also, he studied with some great philosophers, for one, Paul Churchland. And I was really intrigued in his book because he tells the story of something he learned from Paul Churchland, which is really wonderful and shocked me a little, knowing Paul Churchland's philosophy, which is a little different than what this story tells us. And actually, it's been really helpful for me to hear that. And there's lots of other interesting stories in here. And Paco himself is just a really great conversation partner. So I hope you enjoy it. I'm glad you're here. Hope you're doing well wherever you're making your way. I send you lots of love. And if you want to support this show in any way, it really helps. And I really thank you. And there's many ways you can find to do that, whatever way you want. It's appreciated.
Paco Calvo.
Okay. I just want to make sure I don't say something wrong.
But Paco Calvo usually easier to pronounce. Murcia is way more difficult because people say
Murcia. Okay.
Murcia,
See, I say
Murcia,
that wrong already.
Murcia.
Murcia.
Oh,
Still
oh
wrong.
wow. No, that's
Yeah.
pretty good. Yeah.
Okay.
It's not an easy word for foreigners. So Murcia is
No, that's a hard sound. All right. Yes. Okay. Okay. Hi, Paco. Thank you so much for being here today. It's really wonderful to see you.
yeah, thanks for having me.
So I've been reading your book, this one, Planta Sapiens. It's so wonderful.
Well done.
And there's so much I want to talk about in there, but I kind of want to start at the end in a weird way with you discuss these expeditions to Mars and so on, trying to sort of explore planets and so forth. And you bring up this really interesting thing, which I'd never heard of until your book, about plants inspiring some new possible ways of thinking about these things. And I just want to tell you, I was at a neuroscience conference recently, and one of the questions they were talking about computation and how we think of modeling the brain, of course, and all of this. And someone in the audience, one of the questions was, so all of these models are inspired by thinking of human brains, but does anyone ever think about other forms of intelligence when they're trying to come up with computational models? So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that at first, just the idea, for example, maybe of the Grobot or
Oh, I see. Well, I mean, literally, you can find sources of plant-based inspiration in any walk of life, literally any field whatsoever. I mean, if you think, because to start with, just think of the morphology, the materials, the actual, if you think about computation, nowadays it has become fashionable to talk to speak of morphological computation, or the way we decentralize or outsource computational power into the periphery, into the embodiment or into the environment. So how we outsource things out of the CPU, right? That we are supposed to have, right? But we don't, after all, right? So
right.
that's one of the things about Planta Sapiens, because as you know, having gone through it, I like to think that we kill two birds with one stone. Like we get to understand plants better for what they are in themselves and for themselves. And at the same time, it allows us to rethink what this distorted picture we have of ourselves. And the same happens with robots. So when we are designing our robots, our gadgets, our toys, think of a humanoid, typical Japanese humanoid, or rovers on exploring Mars, right? And we can't help it, but I'm pretty sure we don't do it on purpose. We just can't help it. We can't implicitly, tacitly. So we take ourselves, however tacitly, as the gold standard. And sometimes we don't even verbalize it or make it explicit, but hey, if you're gonna explore somewhere where your whereabouts, you gotta go, stand on your 2 feet and walk and locomote, and to reach point B, starting at point A, you've got to move your body from point A to point B, right? To get there, to reach your target. And that's something, it's so obvious to us that we don't even give it some thought to the very possibility that other forms of life might have evolved different ways of reaching their goals, right? And one obvious alternative is growth. So plants, when we say, hey, they are sessile, they are stuck, they are anchored to the root system, and we think that they've got to be stupid somehow because they cannot locomote, as if in locomotion itself was the mark of intelligence, or the borderline in between the non-intelligent and the intelligent. Instead of saying, hey, isn't it amazing evolution, how many different tricks it can play? And so to me, the example of robots, which in the book the reader will see, it's kind of towards the end of the book, as an application, but it gives you a lot of food for thought to rethink many of the ways in which we approach or we appreciate our surroundings or our interaction with other organisms, right? Biological or
Absolutely.
artificial.
Yeah, as you say, the robot normally, of course, we're thinking of how can it move from point A to point B in the
Yeah,
way that you just laid out. But
yeah,
plants also move from point A to point B without leaving point A,
yeah,
you
yeah.
point
That's
out.
it.
And
That's it.
that's a whole different way to think
Well,
about designing an
yeah.
explorative vehicle.
It's absolutely amazing. Well, I mean, in the case of the robots, in this chapter 9 of the book, as I explained, most of the headaches, like engineers at the Jet Propulsion Lab or you name it, which any space agency, when they have a rover exploring Mars or the moon or wherever, they all their worries have to do with things that could go wrong as I locomote from point A to point B. So a crack on the ground, oh, don't get stuck. Watch your wheels. Or a sand dune, and you can't keep propelling yourself, or a slope 30 degrees or a cliff. So anything can mean trouble, or I mean, for God's sake, I mean, this costs a fortune. You better keep your rover up and running, right? In
Absolutely.
plants, the thing is that, so this is the issue, that we are not solving the problem by adding more code, so by adding more information to the algorithm. So
Hmm.
you are not foreseeing all those possibilities, all those contingencies, and trying to solve it by including those possibilities in the recipe book that your rover is following. You simply solve the problem by thinking of a different problem space. So if you grow in a growbot, a growing robot, a growbot, in a growbot, as you reach your target through growth, you don't care about the crack on the ground. You grow over the crack. So you don't care. This is like a hanging bridge. If you need to swim across the river to get to the other bank, you care about the stream, the strength of the waterfall, right? But if you get across to the other riverbank as a hanging bridge, you don't care about the stream of water. You just
Exactly.
hang over it.
Yeah,
So
it's a wonderful way to learn from plants
yeah,
that
yeah, absolutely.
opens up all kind of other possibilities.
Mm,
Also, I bring it up not only because I think it's spectacular, but also because it speaks to a lot of these issues of when we think about what intelligence is or cognition is, we often think of it, as you were already
mm,
sort of bringing up, as somehow being able to move or
mm,
something involved with movement. And I kind of wonder about the difference between growth and movement, to be very honest with you, because well, we could get into that a little bit later. But
mm,
now I want to think about, in that context that we just kind of laid out, this wonderful, beautiful idea of Darwin watching his, was it cucumber plants and the
mm,
tendrils, right? Because this is kind of a wonderful example of this growth that
mm.
plants do, the way that we might rethink something like a bot on Mars, the way that a plant can reach out and with its tendrils and explore is just spectacular.
Yeah.
So yeah.
No, I was gonna say, but you see, I mean, even in the case of Darwin, you've seen there is a lot of Darwin in the book, right? A little bit of
Yeah,
that.
I think I fell in love with Darwin a little bit in your book. I've read
Absolutely.
so much Darwin, by the way, let me say. I mean, as a neuroscience and philosopher, Darwin is everywhere. But your book, I felt your love for him. This is Love and Philosophy, so I
Absolutely.
can use that word. I hope
Yeah,
it's
yeah, no,
okay.
definitely, definitely. He's my hero. I mean,
Yeah.
actually, even when I was writing the book, this all started in sabbatical in Edinburgh, and I was writing just in these cafes in the old town, just
Yeah, yeah.
opposite where he was lodging as a medicine student in his early 20s or late teens,
Oh,
right?
it's wonderful. Yeah,
I,
I felt that space, being in the space, and you wanted to end it kind of where he was walking. And yeah, yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. No, but I
Speaking
was
of
gonna
movement, but
Yeah, yeah. No, no, I was just gonna mention in relation to Darwin and the cucumber tendrils and everything, that to me what's truly amazing about what Darwin was able to do is something I keep telling my students nowadays, I mean in 2024,
mhm.
because we are so obsessed with thinking, hey, if only you had the right tools, we would all be able to appreciate what we are missing, right? Like, oh yeah, yeah, sure. This is just a matter of budget, of equipment. Give me the right observation tool, and I'm pretty sure I will spot it, right? And no,
Right.
we keep missing it. In our lab, we time lapse plans, right? So we've got to time lapse. To time lapse them. We've got to speed them up, because the time scale in which they grow, their growing behavior, the time scale in which it happens, and our time scale of observation are so different that we need to accelerate them through time-lapse photography. So we take a picture every minute, every 5 minutes, whatever, like for days, weeks, months. Then when you assemble the footage, you say, oh my God, now I see what's going on here, right? But there is a danger here, and it's that we become mentally lazy. It's as if you could simply, my students think, oh, that's pretty easy. I mean, on a Friday evening, you set the settings of your time lapse camera. Okay, off you go for the weekend. Come back on Monday, assemble the footage. Oh wow, look, popcorns, and then just watch the cucumber doing its thing, right? No, even watching time lapse footage of plants doing their stuff, you will still miss it if you are not in the right frame of mind. So that's why it's so important to do, first of all, prior to using time-lapse equipment, to do what Darwin was doing, because he was observing plant behavior to the naked eye. To the naked eye means in plant time, so in its own time scale. So rather than accelerating plants, he was decelerating himself. So to me, that's the right way to do it. To get started, of course, then you need to do time lapse, right? But at least to get started that way, to train your eye to be in the right frame of mind. And that's what Darwin was able to accomplish. So to me, it's still amazing that so many people nowadays still miss plant intelligent behavior. And they even complain that we are anthropomorphizing plants by time lapsing them. Some plant physiologists, they complain along those lines, right? Like, I beg your pardon. And when you're studying a hummingbird flying behavior and you use speed cameras, are you anthropomorphizing hummingbirds? I mean, we need these tools, right, to flesh out the behaviors. But what Darwin was able to do to the naked eye, it still shocks me today.
Yeah, I'll let people read the book to really get the full story, but I guess we should say for people listening. So he was sick, right? And he's in bed,
Mm.
and the plants were
Yeah,
kind of in front of him. So in a way, life sort of slowed him down. Yeah.
absolutely.
And so he was
Yeah.
just really mesmerized by them. There's a wonderful quote in there. I'm not sure I remembered exactly, but that he was fascinated by his tendrils or something. And it was just watching them
Yeah.
move and
Yeah.
sort of, as you say, when you slow down and actually observe something, it
Mm.
does open up in a
Yeah,
different way.
there is something more genuine, something that you do get to achieve that you just cannot reach otherwise. So there
No.
is something to it. And
Yeah,
it's
it's real
mental.
scientific practice. I think Darwin, I mean, we won't do the whole thing about Darwin, but he's a great example of that in the way that he took time.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And
mhm.
nowadays that's an issue. I mean,
It
today in today's
is. It
world
is.
of fast science, and
Yeah,
the,
we've gotten really
we really need to
away
slow
from
down.
that. We've forgotten how important that is. And
Absolutely.
plants is another thing plants could probably teach us, actually.
Yeah, definitely, definitely.
Yeah. But just to get to this, so that opens up something that I really want to talk about a lot, which is people have a very strong reaction, a lot of people, when this idea is brought up that plants could have intelligence. Okay. So you, of course, wrote a whole book laying out ways of doing that. For example, with the tendrils moving, I mean, we're already talking about that as a kind of intelligence, but you show many ways. For example, through that they have to make choices and decisions and so on. How this
Mm,
relates to the way cognition has already been studied in human ways. But what's very interesting too is that people are so reactive about that
mm,
when you hear a plant is cognitive, either it's fascinating. I mean, there's also people who are completely fascinated by it, and it draws them in, and then there are other people who really are turned off by it, and
absolutely.
even a bit like feels like a violent thing to them.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
I
yeah.
think, and I want you to talk about this, but I feel like that's coming because these words, we locate them with our assumptions as human, just
Mm,
by default. So when we hear plant cognition, we, not we, but yes, we, like the big we, it's like, okay, then that must mean that plants have what is a human cognition or a human intelligence. This is the part that seems very hard to and nuanced. And of course, you do a wonderful job in your book, but to realize that that's not what you mean when you say plant intelligence. It's not the plant is a different embodied creature. It is a different
Yeah,
embodiment,
yeah,
and so its intelligence will not look like human intelligence. Yeah.
yeah. Well, there are two issues here, right? You're absolutely right, but there are two issues here. One is that sure, we should try to assess any organism's form of intelligence in its own terms. So you don't compare one to the other. You just do. I mean, I give these talks to secondary school kids, and I ask them always, who do you think has better eyesight, better sight, right? Um, an earthworm or an eagle? And they all go, an eagle, an eagle. I say, hold on a sec. Who can see better underneath the leaves, the foliage? And they say, hey, yeah, sure. I mean, then this shakes all their convictions, because they are assuming that an earthworm's, the way they see the world, which by they don't even have eyes, just an eye spot, detect light gradients. It's a degraded form of vision compared to the eagle. Instead of thinking, hey, this is the best adaptation they have, provided the needs they do have, and they don't have the need of the eagle to identify a rabbit and plummet from 200 yards. So we keep missing the point that it's not about comparing ones against the others, as if there was some measuring rod and we were providing the gold standard, right? With that being said, mistake number two is to, so even if you get here and say, okay, sure, let's just value everyone's unique form of intelligence, we keep forgetting that we might very probably be wrong as to what human intelligence consists of. Because even if we tell them apart and say, hey, let's talk about plant intelligence or Planta Sapiens and Homo sapiens, and don't go nuts about it, because we don't mean to say that Planta Sapiens equates Homo sapiens. Say, hold on a sec. In a sense, I do mean to imply that one equates the other. Once we have revised what we truly mean by human intelligence. So the problem is that human intelligence is not what computational neuroscience or cognitive psychology tells you it is. So we are obsessed with the computer metaphor.
Yeah.
We are obsessed with the brain-mind divide, as if this was a matter of checking out the mental software running on your neural hardware, right? And that is so deeply rooted, that metaphor, the computer metaphor, that we go through undergrad education in psychology, in neuroscience, in computer science, and we don't think twice about what we truly mean by that. I mean, is somebody sitting at the wheel in my brain? How do you mean? So we keep forgetting that there is not a little homunculus doing the cognizing, the driving, the navigation when I navigate my surroundings, right? So because that to me distorted metaphor is so deeply rooted, that is what makes people, you even said violently, like very, very strongly
I'm sure
oppose.
you felt it more than
Oh,
most.
absolutely. You
Yeah.
can't imagine. I mean, I couldn't tell you the type of things some people tell me by email, right? Now
Yeah,
I
I can imagine, because it's almost a reactive. It's
have
almost
the feeling that by discussing plant intelligence, we are taking something that belongs to us. Mm. So that's the thing.
exactly.
So one thing that when we put these two things together and we think of intelligence as a continuum and not as a binary black or white thing, uh, even a continuum is the wrong approach, because with the idea of a continuum, we can think of minimal intelligence as opposed to full-fledged intelligence. And no, it's not that. So to me, my approach is to think, hey, let's see, what is it that unites us all in the tree of life? It's like the master key. So I would like to think that we are trying to search for the master key, some master key that unlocks any branch in the tree of life,
Mm,
right?
mm.
So to do that, to me, the idea is to get started the other way around, from the bottom up, not from the top down. So when you get started from the top down, as we are sapient, and then provide the gold standard, and then what do we usually do? Either we go for, mammals because they have a neocortex, or primates, or even those more open-minded try to extend it as much as possible, but always within the animal kingdom.
Yeah, starting with what could possibly be a brain or something.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And you know what? What's really funny? That this happened to me. That's not in the book, because that happened afterwards, precisely when I was on tour, promoting the book, and I was having this reception with the Dalai Lama, and I
Wow.
was,
That's
yeah, I
kind of,
was,
sorry, we have to pause for a minute. You're having a reception with the Dalai Lama?
yeah,
That's good.
we were having this meeting in Dharamsala.
Oh, okay. Wow. Wonderful.
Buddhist, a group of Buddhist monks. So the Dalai Lama, he was receiving us, like the Western scientists, one morning. So the organizers, they said, hey, if you have a book or something, you can bring a copy with you and give it as a present to the Dalai Lama. So I brought a copy of Planta Sapiens with me and handed it to him,
Oh, lovely.
and said naively, out of mere ignorance, I was thinking, well, sure. I mean, this thing that we were talking about, like being on the same page, something that unites us all. I'm pretty sure, like the Dalai Lama will be with me. I mean, we'll be on the same page, as opposed to these, Western reductionist plant physiologists that don't get it, that they think this is just a matter of unearthing molecular mechanisms or whatever. The Dalai Lama should, I mean, pretty sure. So I handed the copy to him of Planta Sapiens, and I said, because plants are sapient, or I said, plants are sentient, I told him, I think. And then he went like raising his eyebrows. He said, no way.
Wow.
He said, only animals can be sentient. And you know what? He gave me a copy of a book of his, like from 2012, I think. I hadn't read it. So I read his book on the way back, flying back to Spain.
Yeah.
And I found this quote in his book, and it was just what we were talking about, robots. It was about locomotion. And he was explicitly saying that animals need to be sentient because they locomote. So he was identifying, connecting far too straightforwardly uh, in sentience to locomotion. Plants are sessile, they stay seated, they don't need to be sentient. That was the Dalai Lama's approach, which means to me that was very informative, because I understood that our prejudices, our biases go way deeper. Because for us, it's too easy to blame Western mechanistic reductionist science and think that other traditional knowledge or other cultures have a more. And no, I realized, to me, this was good news in a sense. It was good news, like as in saying, hey, there is something way deeper than simply Western scientists doing their mechanistic, No, no. So I think it's something very, very intriguing. It goes way deeper. So I learned a lot from that conversation.
That's a wonderful, wonderful
Yeah,
story,
yeah,
because it's also helps us like bring empathy into this, because it's not that the people who react violently, or even in that case, it wasn't a violent reaction, but an immediate no, right? That
yeah,
actually,
absolutely.
yeah, oftentimes it just comes because people care so deeply about trying to understand mind and cognition, and they've gone so deeply into it and into the literature, or their whole lives are kind of based on doing a certain kind of neuroscience, or whatever. It's because they've cared so much about it and they've tried to build up a narrative. And it's
Yeah,
usually this linear narrative, and it's
yeah,
usually in the way you were describing of the top down, bottom up, as
yeah,
if it can only be one way or the other. We have trouble thinking of it as nested instead of as linear,
yeah.
that there
And
might
even,
be nested ways of thinking about it,
yeah,
So
yeah,
I don't think it comes from it comes from a place that people care so much. And the reason I think it gets so passionate, you would know more about this, but is because there's such hard questions if you do give intelligence to plants within that linear framework.
mhm,
In general, it's hard, but
yeah,
because then it becomes like, for the Dalai Lama, as you were telling that story, I was thinking, well, then his approach to, you bring it up in the book in terms of pain and emotions and suffering and stuff like this, but if you're going to fit plants into that linear model, then the questions become, almost impossible to answer. But what
You
you're
know,
saying is we need to rethink all of that, which,
absolutely.
yeah.
So you know what I think? This is something which this is in the book. When I say, remember, I say, hey, what counts is not what's inside the head, but what the head is inside of, right? This is a motto from ecological psychology.
Yeah, you talk a lot about the relationality and the context
Right,
and the
right.
environment. And
But to me, when we apply this other bottom-up approach and this thing I was telling you about finding or looking for this master key, right? That
mm-hmm.
that gets to open any branch in the tree of life. Think about it. If we put it this way, things are way simpler. I think we make it far too complicated because we are starting, wrong-footed. So if we don't think what's inside the head, but what the head is inside of, what are we sharing? We think that we need to be sharing brain tissue, mm, locomotion. No, no, no. What we share is regularities on planet Earth. So the sun sets and the sun rises for any form of life. That's news. That's information to any form of life whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
So we have all evolved adaptations that tune to environmental regularities that are all informative to any form of life. If you think about circadian clocks, that's crystal clear. I mean, sure, we all need to tick to the planetary cycles, so the
Mm-hmm.
day-night cycle. And you see the circadian clocks in plants are the very same thing as in animals. It could be so narrow-minded to say, hey, but plants don't have a suprachiasmatic nucleus, where you have the master clock. So you see the light goes through your optic nerve, then hits on. So you have your master clock, and then that puts in sync all your peripheral clocks. So the way you explain circadian clocks in neuroscience does a disfavor if it is supposed to help understand what unites us all by focusing on neural tissue alone, as if you couldn't tell time without the neural tissue. So what counts is not the material substrate, the implementation that allows you to tick, but rather, regardless of the type of implementation, the fact that we all have feedback loops in our molecular clocks in any form of life whatsoever, because the sun sets and the sun rises, and that's news that on evolutionary time you need to care about, because predators come out, you need to go hunting, you need to hide, temperature goes down, relative humidity. So all these environmental parameters correlate with those day-night cycles. How come a form of life is going to be is going to ignore such regularities being so powerful and so informative? So when you put it in those terms, it could be the other way around. It could be a miracle if some form of life wouldn't tune to those regularities. So when you put it in terms of the environmental regularities themselves, you don't care whether I use neuronal tissue or non-neuronal tissue to deliver the goods. It's just a matter of being in sync with those planetary cycles.
Absolutely. I love that you bring up regularities because this is how I think of it too. I mean, this is a research channel. That's how it started. And so, I mean, but the way I've come to think of it and what I was so excited about in reading your book, because you open up a lot of things connected to this, is that, yeah, starting in so-called bottom at the bottom up. I want to come to why I think that's a little problematic in a minute, but if you just think of any body, right, that's comes into this encounter, this world, it's all about making its way through those regularities. Now, I think of it in terms of making way and navigability, and that sounds like what we were talking about at the beginning, where something has to move from A to B. But what I'm trying to do, and I think it's very close to what you've already done in a way, is rethink what we mean by what that means to navigate or to make way. I don't use navigate all the time because it does connect so much to this idea of movement in the way that the Dalai Lama meant it. And for good reason, because it does explain a lot. But if you think of, you talk about landscape in your book too, but I try to think about different kinds of landscapes, different kinds of spaces. And in that sense, a plant is definitely moving through a space, a landscape, an encounter, its life, in the same way that everyone means by movement of cognition in terms of animals and plants and so forth.
Plants are perceiving affordances. So they are
Yeah,
perceiving their own possibilities of
exactly.
interaction with the surroundings. They do it through growth, but what counts is those encounters. And
Exactly, with those regularities of the environment.
yeah,
It's
absolutely.
shaping it, and it's being shaped by it in the way that
That's it. It's got to be reciprocal. And as we say in ecological psychology, the unit of analysis is the plant environment system as such. If you detach it and you think of the organism, plant or human, or you think of the environment, you miss the plot. It's got to be the system as such, the plant or animal environment system as such. Then is when you get to see how you are generating information by either locomoting or growing. But the fact that, so now if I get closer to the webcam and you see my face, so you see my image expanding in your retina. Now if I move away, you see my image shrinking in your retina. So these patterns of expansion and contraction is what's informative. If, put it this way, if plants were not able to generate these flows of energy, in this case, an optic flow, but could be any energy form whatsoever, so gradients and relative rates of change, right, in this modality. So if plants were not able to generate these energy flows, they couldn't be intelligent. But I don't know of any form of life that doesn't generate those energy flows. Bacteria swimming up a chemical gradient is generating those energy flows.
Yeah,
Plants
and that
growing,
interaction is the intelligence, right?
that's
I
it.
mean,
That's
it's
it.
not that they're intelligent and they do that. That is the intelligence, which then
That's it.
builds into what we think of as human.
It's emergent.
thought.
So it's an emergent phenomena out of the interaction itself. So you cannot, that's what I meant about the cognitive science, approach, like
Yeah, right. Start
computational
with the
neuroscience. Like
brain. Yeah.
you cannot try to find what's being stored somewhere in your brain. I mean, it's about the interaction itself. It's always emergent, dynamical. So
Exactly. This is why I think the bottom up is right, the way you're describing it. I think cognition starts with whatever life, any life that's making its way through any space, right? I think intelligence and cognition start there, although they're nothing like what we as humans experience as thought and cognition. But the problem is that because we are where we are as humans, and we could even think of ourselves as kind of life at a certain sensory point. And at this kind of sensory point, we have this idea of thought in this very traditional way where we imagine there's kind of this, it feels like there's something in our heads where we see images or we hear words or whatever. And so that just in an everyday assumed sense is what we think is cognition. And then, so that's why a plant couldn't possibly be having this experience, right? And people don't think about all that, but it results in a violent reaction when you say plants have intelligence.
but it's funny, you see, this violent reaction is funny because, believe it or not, even the Dalai Lama was open to the very possibility of AI sentience. So that some future AI.
I love that you bring that up. Yeah. Isn't that funny that we can give it to AI, but not plants?
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, I'm not kidding. So the Buddhist monks in this meeting, they were open to the possibility of a future AI giving rise to the emergence of sentience, their own form of sentience. And all these Western scientists attending the meeting, they did agree as well. Nobody dares to say, hey, how could an AI possibly, well, we don't know. They remain skeptic in an open sense, like saying, well, we don't know. We'll see what the future has for us. Like we'll see in 10, 20, 50 years time, future AI, we don't know how sophisticated it's going to, and they don't realize that it is meaningless to me because that sophistication is sophistication that only has to do with algorithms. And intelligence is flesh and bone. It has to do with biology, not with following a recipe book. So it's not about the algorithm, it's about the implementation.
I couldn't
And
agree more. It's just, I guess what I was trying to say is since most of us begin in that place, it feels linear. So when we say bottom up, the way it's heard is that there's a plant and then it evolves into a
yeah,
human. And I don't actually think of it like that. And I don't think you do either. I think of it more as nested. There's all kind of many different kinds of possible intelligences as life.
absolutely.
But it starts from the very beginning in
Yeah.
terms of like the bottom of whatever you want to define as the first kind of life, probably, but not in this form that we experience as
I
humans.
guess even the actual way we visualize the tree of life is distorted
It
because
is, yeah.
I mean, evolution, we see it as if, any species, animal or non-animal, uh, we see it as an impoverished stage, as if they hadn't reached their goal in evolutionary terms, as if they were, impoverished versions compared to us. We are at the pinnacle. And this is
Mm-hmm.
the Aristotelian
But
approach.
that's that linear thing. That's why top
Yeah,
down,
yeah,
bottom up.
yeah,
I think we even have to leave that in a way because it just
absolutely.
people then lock into that, and
Yeah,
it's not
yeah.
like that. It's not
I,
like
I,
that. It's not
no,
that
no,
there's a
I
plant to a
entirely agree.
human to an
Yeah,
AI, and that's why the AI seems like it would be more easy to
mm,
understand because it's built in that line so that it comes after us, and we don't know how it will happen, but at least it's like sharing all these kind of things that we associate. Which it's a confusion, right?
mm,
It's a confusion for me that I think it helps. I think, I don't know, to think of affordances. Like if you think of an embodied thing like a plant or an insect or an animal or a human, then there's a kind of trail or a path of affordances that reflect only that body, right?
yeah,
Especially if that's what an affordance is. But when you
yeah.
think of an AI or any kind of tool or machine, the affordance is always to whatever's using it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. No, no, definitely. So put it the example again, going back to the robots. That's a vicarious exploration of Mars, right? So we want to see Mars through the rover's eyes. And we don't
Mm,
get it that that's in principle impossible because the possibilities of interaction being perceived, the affordances being perceived, relate to the body scale of interaction. So
mm,
what you are able to do as a rover on wheels, the type of interactions you can engage in because of the body plan that you have and the scale of interaction allows you to see one thing and not other things. So we speak of this room as if it was the room in which we can all inhabit, like you or an ant or a giraffe or an elephant or a plant, as if the room, no, no, is a different room for every single organism.
absolutely. Yeah.
In semiotics, we know that. That's biosemiotics. It's
Mm-hmm.
meaning making.
And there's plenty of experiments using our tools, our AI,
Yeah,
such that we understand that a bee has a different phenomenology than a
that,
fox, than a
yeah, we
human. So
cannot translate from one to the other. It's just
no, no.
eyes translation.
You can understand that they're dealing with the regularities and with a pattern that's similar, but it
Hmm.
doesn't mean the body is similar or the experience is similar. But that's why there's something about the regularities. Like we are all dealing with the regularities of our environment with a similar pattern, but the way what those regularities are in specific and what the body is in specific and what the environment is all goes into is kind of whatever this is we're trying to assess, I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah. And you see, well, if remember in the book, I speak in the epilogue. I mean, one of the issues that keep me awake at night is education. Like because I
Mm-hmm.
think that most of it is not about scientific facts. So it's not. I mean, it's not as in hey, we need to replicate these experiments or we need to get more robust data. And if we get that data, more robust data or better experiments or better working hypotheses and test them, taking them to the bench, as if we needed more solid science, which of course we do. But it's not just about that because if we don't rethink education, we won't be able to take to the bench alternative hypotheses. So most of this thing we are talking about doesn't even have to do with plants. It has to do with the overall vision that we have,
Yeah.
right? And the problem is not about plant biology. Even though we have a lot of skeptics in this field, like these violent responses you were mentioning,
Mm-hmm.
in psychology, undergrads studying psychology for majors, they are never exposed throughout their careers to Gibsonian ecological psychology, for example. They are only taught cognitive psychology. And the same happens in cognitive neuroscience. In some course, if you are lucky enough to have one professor who has an inclination and they might mention Gibson or affordances in 2 or 3 classes, but not as in your curriculum, academically speaking, is not envisaging the academic curriculum as trying to walk you through all
Mm-hmm.
those alternatives. So even when you are thinking, hey, we are doing the best possible science, we can, all the alternative hypotheses that you are able to envisage belong to the same problem space. And thereby, you are making inferences to the best explanation by discarding some alternative hypotheses and landing on others in this narrow position in which you are, yeah, sure, that's a good way to test your hypothesis, but there is all this region of logical space that you have not navigated because you cannot simply, don't even think that it exists. And that doesn't have to do with the scientific method, it has to do with education.
Yeah, and actually I see this as very much connected to what you're opening with in terms of rethinking intelligence, and the way it's example of it is plants in a way, because in the same way we were talking about it's not linear and there's not only one path. If you're going to explore a landscape or a space, depending on your body and depending where you are and depending what tools you have and depending all these things, right? It's going to be different how you explore and get to whatever the goal is, even if it's the same goal for. And so, but in science, we think there can only be one way. Like, and if you find the way, that's the way. And then you don't have, it's very hard for us to hold the nestedness. In the same way, I think that it's hard for us to hold that there's different kinds of intelligences, that plants can be intelligent in a way that's different than humans, but it's nevertheless a similar pattern. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. We put it all under as if it belonged to the same, in one basket. Well, even when you are critical about plant intelligence, those skeptics, even when they criticize the very idea of plant intelligence, they miss it completely by discussing plant intelligence as if all plants share one form of intelligence.
Right. I love that you bring that up in the book, that you can't speak of
I mean, how do you
all
mean plant?
plants, right? You have to
Yeah.
look at each individual.
So when people say, are plants intelligent? If I ask someone, are plants intelligent, they would go yes or no. But very few people ask, which plant are we talking about? So if I ask, are animals intelligent? Everyone would say, who do you have in mind? A dolphin? A termite? I mean, who are you talking about? Before answering, a dolphin, oh, wow, an elephant, a mosquito. But in plants, we don't even picture the idea that different plants might exhibit different smarts.
And even someone who would say, yes, animals are intelligent, will then say, well, a dolphin would be intelligent in a different way than a bee, or, and so forth. Yeah.
But plants, so you see, when a plant physiologist criticizes the very idea of plant intelligence by simply saying physiology explains it all, like photosynthesis or this or that, um, that's the best proof, the best way to show that they are not getting at the heart of the question. Because who cares if first some of them cannot do photosynthesis, some of them don't have chlorophyll, and they are parasites, and they have to suck up sugars from host trees or whatever. And so any example you provide, there will be counter examples, but in the end it's about, hey, what are your problems, your problems, the ones you have to deal with.
Yeah. What's your goal? What's your challenge? What's the
Not just
body?
not just the different species, but the different individuals belonging to the same species.
I
Are you
think
being
that, yeah.
spoiled? I mean, remember in Planta Sapiens, I speak of domesticated versus wild plants, right? So
Yeah,
are you
that's
being
wonderful.
spoiled,
Yeah.
or do you need to to oil your machinery to get all your smarts at their best, because there is no agriculture, nobody's gonna be there looking after you. So
It's wonderful the way you began the book too. I think this speaks to this, with the Delphic kind of conversion moment. If you want to tell it, you can, or not. People can just read it. But there's this kind of know thyself, right, in Delphi. And I was recently there, maybe like a year and a
were
half ago,
you?
so I could imagine it very well when I was reading it. And yeah, and this you talk about. I think you have this wonderful phrase of thinking into other organisms, or the experiences of other organisms, thinking into that. And
Yeah.
in a way, I feel like, even with what you're talking about with education now and this slowing down, and what we were talking about with Darwin and his bed, not bread, Darwin
Yeah.
in his bed watching the vines, there's some kind of way in which we've arrived at a moment ecologically where we have to maybe observe in a different way and rethink what a self is in terms of knowing self. What that means, rethinking what intelligence is. I mean, I feel like you're bringing that up and starting us in that place in the
Yeah.
book. Yeah.
Yeah, no, yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, remember, I mean, this is not spoiler because in the preface I used the expression like navel gazing, right?
Yeah,
So
right.
so we're navel gazing, and that we need to rethink everything, root and branch, like
Yeah.
get started from square one because we are just not getting it. Even, even, so to me, look, uh, sometimes I'm even more worried about those who think they are sensitive enough or they already appreciate plant life than about those that don't. Because
Mhm.
the skeptics can be skeptical and you know why, and it's just a matter of, as we said, of education, whatever. But sometimes the ones who already think they do appreciate plant life and they are, they might be doing it for the wrong reasons. And
Mm.
that's more difficult to identify because they already think they are on the same page. No,
So that
no.
observation isn't happening actually. It's
Yeah.
a similar, like you've latched into the linear
Hmm.
story and you just kind of go without.
Yeah, yeah,
Mm.
yeah. Already, yeah. That's it. That's it. So you don't get to see the hey, I started wrong footed, right? So
Mhm.
to me, the example is I think of environmental studies, right? So many people who are very sensible, to all the climate crisis, all the mess we are creating and everything, and they still speak of plants as resources, and then we speak of,
I love that part of the book too, the way you show that way of thinking of it.
yeah. So even then, no, so know yourself. Are you sure you know yourself? So we should be rethinking ourselves the way we think we appreciate plants, which might be for the wrong reasons.
Yeah,
Even
and the way we just assume what they are when we're walking
mm,
around and
yeah,
being in the
that's it.
world with
That's it.
them.
That's it. So is
And
it
there's something
possible?
wonderful about that, by the way, which your book also does. It opens up something for you too, if you take the moment to do that, I would say.
Yeah,
Your
yeah.
life expands in a
Well,
nice
I'm
way.
glad you say that. I mean, I hope it does help in that sense as well. I mean,
I think
it.
so. You see the world as more alive, as it
Yeah,
is.
yeah. So to me, I would like to think, that this is work in progress, as in myself. So every day I need to remind to myself, hey Paco, hold on a sec. When
Mm.
you are, encountering or walking through your in my garden, whatever, or going for a stroll in the forest, what you name it. Um, can you truly appreciate that tree or that plant you are walking by or encountering in itself, for itself, detached from your needs? Can we truly care for them, truly forgetting about our needs? Because even when you are into environmental science and concern and all this, it looks to me that we are not truly getting there. Like we value them, but in our heart of hearts, we value them because oh shit, we need oxygen, we need textile, we need food, we need them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I think that we should rethink it all. We should not care for them because we need them. We should care. I mean, think about it. How do you mean? Do you mean to say that if we didn't need them, we shouldn't care for them? I mean, imagine we managed to get our oxygen, textile, some other way. Does it mean then that we can, forget just I don't care about them anymore because they are not resources that I need? No, they've got to have their intrinsic value. And ethically speaking, morally speaking, caring for them, it has got to do with what they are in themselves and for themselves, not because of the way I need them. And I think we are far from being there. Uh,
I think this gets at this love, word, which we'll come back to, but it's wonderful you say that because just a few months ago, I guess, I asked my husband who's working with plants or with trees specifically, actually, like, what if they did come up with some way to have some kind of or ersatz tree that you could put in cities, because he works in urban planning, that you could put in cities and do the job of trees, like something would be really missing there. And just to try to
mm,
connect these threads a little bit, because your book, I think it's much bigger than even plant cognition, which is already a big thing, but in these ways we're talking about. But there's something in this about, like, we've talked about Gibson a lot, and some quote I like about him was trying to get past this way of thinking of subjective or objective, or thinking of I and them, human and plant, like this beyond dichotomy, which is a theme of
Yeah.
mine. And that's what I love about his writing in a way. And I feel like it's one of the things I love about what you're doing with the book too, and this know thyself. And it's like it's we're seeing ourselves in a way. I mean, not to get too mystical, but if we stop and see the plants differently, we're also seeing our own potential and capacity differently. And in a weird way, you bring it up in the book of how the plants are kind of using us too. And like, how do we want to be used? And there's this kind of,
Yeah.
ecological
Yeah.
interaction that we can really change the potential of what's possible for us too in this slowdown and
Oh, I see. I see.
change.
Definitely, definitely. Well, yeah, no, that's a great way to put it. Thanks. Yeah. So one thing we keep forgetting is that even when we put it in an evolutionary context, is that we forget that there is nothing we as evolution as such. I mean, there is only co-evolution. Nothing evolves without somebody else co-evolving.
Yeah.
So everything is
Yeah.
co-evolution.
Mm.
So if when you think of a flower and a pollinator, sometimes we put the focus, the emphasis, the, the spotlight onto the pollinator because we might be interested in understanding how the pollinator, tracks the scent or lands on the petals or whatever it does. So
That
we might,
reminds me of in the book you talk about the bee and the orchid, right? The bee is
yeah,
using
yeah,
the
yeah,
orchid, then
yeah,
yeah, that's
yeah.
beautiful.
So it goes both ways. But funnily enough, so there are like two hurdles. One is shift from evolution to co-evolution. There is no evolution as such. Every single form of evolution is co-evolution. There are always more than one actor. This is an arms race.
Yeah,
Arms
yeah.
race, right? So pollinator flowers. So this is an arms race, and you are getting here because I got here because you, and then you understand how everything is flourishing. The pollinator's capacities to navigate the flowers and the flowers to attract the pollinators, to lure them, to all the things that is always a pattern of co-evolution.
Right.
So, but the second part of it, it's that we, in this dichotomy frame of mind that we have, we can't help it, these binary decisions and everything. We keep thinking that, hey, we are, they are the actors, and we forget that we are but just one more actor. So engaged likewise in these patterns of coevolution. So the very same way that flowers and pollinators co-evolved, agriculture, when we are selecting plants phenotypes through, the selection we've been doing for a few thousand years, we don't realize that we are the pollinators. And if so, we are also being selected. And if so, if everything is co-evolving, it is true what you said, that we might see in which ways we might dynamically find other trajectories
Yeah.
from the perspective of we being just one more actor and not the master overlooking its garden.
Exactly. That's that thing that it's so hard to articulate that I feel like we're all trying to articulate in a new way, which is like, or that your book is, when you say we need to rethink intelligence, it has to do with this. And it's what I was trying to bring out with the scales, and that it's not an either or, that it's not just one or the other, that in fact, as you were talking, I was thinking, yeah, so if you're going to assess it from the point of view of the bee, it's going to look this way. If you're going to
Yeah.
assess it from the point of view of the orchid, it's going to look this way. If you're going to assess it from the point of view of the human, it's going to look this way. And those are just assessments. We forget that. Those are just measurements, right? The process itself, the ecological is
Yeah,
is
yeah,
is never stop. It's ongoing, and it's all of it, and it's all mutually kind of
yeah.
co-determining, depending on where you want to look, all the potentials,
Yeah.
and what is to
It's
come.
it's like the real thing unfolds in real time, and you cannot press pause.
No.
And this is like you run the film of evolution, and if you press pause, by definition, you are gonna miss 99% of what's going on. You're just taking snapshots.
It's like what you were saying with the videos, right? It's
Yeah,
wonderful to watch the video of the plant, but
yeah,
as you point out in the book,
Yeah,
just
but
because we've built that on our human kind of cognition, you miss a lot. You have to actually, yeah.
definitely. So, but we need to be so. So the fact this happens in science, the fact that there are cognitive and subjective biases, some people think that they have this romantic, idealized version of science, and they think, no, science can be truly objective, and that's
Mm-hmm.
nobody believes that nowadays, right? Uh, we are aware of our subjective biases, where our cognitive biases, our confirmation biases. I mean, science is done by humans with their hormones, with everything we are. So science is just a product of human activity, like any other product, any other thing we do, right? So with its virtues and its miseries.
Mm-hmm.
So this means that it's not about finding the way to do away with those biases. It's about being aware and making them explicit. So I can take a snapshot and study the pollinator. I just need to remind to myself that this is just a snapshot from the point of view of putting the focus on the pollinator. And I need just simply to remind to myself this is just a slide. I'm slicing reality. I'm, cutting across and just getting a few dimensions. And then you need to remind yourself that this belongs to an n-dimensional hypercube. And you're
Exactly. Yeah.
slicing
Wonderful.
little,
Yeah. In the book, you bring up the famous Nagel article or essay or piece,
yeah,
what is it like to be a bat? And in a way, this is kind of what we're talking about too. And it relates to, in one way, why technology is good, because there's no objective in the sense of the opposite of subjective, that there's some kind of, but there are intersubjective scientific practices that are robust, and that we do make these assessments and we do try to get somewhere. And in a way, with our telescopes, our microscopes, and the you recording the plants, it's all a way for us to at least get a little bit better idea of how to become a plant or become. It's not that we ever will
absolutely.
totally, but we are, in a
Yeah,
way, in this
yeah,
slowing down and rethinking and know thyself. We're trying to see from different perspectives or
yeah.
invent ways. Even books or music or movies are doing that in a sense, but science is doing it in a very rigorous sense.
Yeah, no, definitely. Look, I mean, recently I was reading Ed Young's An Immense World, the best
Yeah,
bestseller. I mean, many people watching this.
about the animals and
Yeah,
all their
yeah,
different sensory
yeah,
capabilities.
yeah. It's an amazing book,
Mm-hmm.
and if you, I mean, this is a good start. I mean, just a suggestion for listeners, for watchers, right? They are watching this. If you take An Immense World, Ed Young's book, and Planta Sapiens, and literally apply Ed Young's recipe, moving out of the animal kingdom, it explodes exponentially. So the mental gymnastics you need to do to understand what Ed Jones is asking you to do, like to put yourself in the shoes of what is it like to be a bat, what is it like to be an elephant, what is it like to be a snake, what is it like to be, and then to understand, hey, your sensory channels are not, the ones that, clear cut that we have our five senses, blah, blah, blah. Things are way more complicated. Some animals you wouldn't believe they would have, snake with their tongue, with the, having a stereo sense of smell, and then you get to see all the details of different animals doing their own things and in ways that you would never imagine. And the way you were saying, yeah, we can use all this, we can make an effort and a leap of imagination, scientifically informed, to put yourself in the shoes of all these life forms, right? So, and Ed Young, he even mentions what is it like to be about Nagel's
Yeah,
paper in the preface of
it's a
his.
wonderful question that,
Yeah, absolutely. And in Planta Sapiens, this is the title of one chapter. What is it like to be a
mm-hmm.
plant?
What I really love that you present, though, is because people kind of stop sometimes with asking the question, and sometimes it's assumed, well, we'll never know what it's like to be a bat. But two very interesting things. First, that you studied with Paul Churchland. That's very interesting. How in the world did that happen? I was kind of shocked by his take on it, and how, I mean, just having read his other philosophy. But I mean, maybe if you feel like it, you could say a little bit about this moment of Paul Churchland, how you ended up there, and this Fahrenheit Celsius thing that
Yeah,
where he
yeah,
would.
well, yeah, definitely. So to me, I mean, Paul Churchland, both Paul and Pat Churchland, I
Yeah,
mean,
wonderful.
at the time, that was in the late 90s. So I was on a Fulbright scholarship, and so it took a year to write up my thesis at San Diego, UCSD. So I was doing my PhD in Glasgow. So that was this year to write it up
Okay,
there.
because you were also with Andy Clark around this time. So
Yeah,
it was, there was a lot of kind of
yeah.
wonderful geography
Yeah, there
happening.
was a lot of going on stuff, and I was
Mhm.
lucky enough to be able to be there. And so in the case of San Diego, it was in the the 90s, and was like at the time was the mecca of artificial neural networks and stuff. And Pat and Paul Churchland were like making all the progress in a neurocomputational perspective in philosophy, all
Mhm.
this stuff. But I do recall this master course Paul was teaching at the moment, and I attended this idea of truly, making the effort, as he was recounting the story of how he, moving from Canada, he was changing from Fahrenheit to Celsius or the other way around, right? And and having to, to make all this effort to change metrics, right?
Right.
And how you end up interiorizing it. So it becomes your new native language as you become fluent into
Mhm.
thinking Celsius or thinking Fahrenheit. If
You
you,
think through those assumptions in a way.
yeah.
You don't have
But
to think about it, or I don't know. It's
yeah,
hard to say.
that's it. That's it. Then, you filter the way through, the
Mhm.
pair of glasses you wear, and then you see the world through. But the ones you carry with you from birth, they're like your mother language and your mother metrics, those are so rooted that you forget that once upon a time you had to learn those.
Yeah.
It's as if they came with you from birth. And no, of course they don't, right? That means that if we are patient and stubborn enough, which Paul was, you can say, hey, I'm gonna make the extra effort to learn a new language as if it was my new native language, my new mother tongue, right? And you can stretch this not just from Celsius to Fahrenheit or vice versa, but to any other system of coordinates that you can translate into, like moving from one space to another, right?
Yeah.
And then you can get to more bizarre places, not just temperature units, but moving, kinetic energy, moving. So you can
Yeah.
start thinking in native speaker in joules, if you are talking about energy or, whatever.
Yeah. He
So
kind of goes down to, if you,
yeah,
or you were thinking about if you start to try to think like
now,
the electron or something. I
yeah,
don't
yeah.
remember what
So
he was.
now Paul Churchland, he's a very original thinker.
Mhm.
And I found a lot of food for thought in brainstorming and having at that time, to me, I was in my 20s, to me was like a
Yeah.
privilege
Amazing that you were around those minds.
to get to pick his brains and all that stuff, right? But with that being said, there is a twist, and is where I think they didn't go far enough. And the Churchlands, they were doing something great at the time, which was questioning this language-like or this Fodorian frame of mind, right, in the philosophy of psychology and the philosophy of science. Like science and psychology doesn't have to do with, reasoning and logic following rules and linguistic formatting. And they were exploiting this vectorial space, right? Like the vectorial space of the weight matrix of a neural network. An artificial neural network, if you have a matrix with all the values of all the synapses, the connections, the strengths, right? Then they were using artificial neural networks as their way of modeling the human mind and the mind of a scientist. That's why he was able to apply those insights from connectionism, from neural network theory, to the philosophy of mind and to the philosophy of science. So that was at the time to me revolutionary. But afterwards, I realized that there was something missing here. And it's that they were just changing one format for another. So they were moving from a linguistic format to a vectorial format. So when people think that their views were very radical, they were not that radical. They were changing one representational language for another, still representational language. So they were still into representationalism and computationalism. They were simply saying, hey, computations and representations are neither linguistic or pictorial or based on good old-fashioned AI. We have vectorial vectors, and we have the space provided by the way we are approximating a function in a neural network. But it was still computational. It was neurocomputational.
Yeah,
Right?
that's a good way to explain it. I think it's the eliminativist kind of side that it's in a weird way. You could almost look at it if you wanted to open it up in the way that you could think of that as ecological, as
That's it.
smushing it together, but then you need the ecological. But I mean, we could talk. That would be another talk. But what I like about what you do in the book and what you just said there, the way you laid it out with the vectors, is actually I can see how you in your young 20s had a kind of revelation, because in a way they're saying what we've been saying. Like, they're showing that there's multiple paths to a similar goal, and that you can actually assess them with science and maths, and kind of even think of them computationally, which is very helpful if we understand that it's just one assessment in the way we were talking about.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah,
One
so it's wonderful
snapshot.
in the book that you present it like that, because then I started thinking, gosh, even like talking about how do we start to understand, like thinking through the experience of a plant or an animal or an insect. We already do it when we learn a new language, for example, or this Fahrenheit Celsius kind of opened up to me thinking, well, we actually can think through different kinds of experience. It's what we do when we read a good book, and so I guess, like, it's wonderful that you made that connection, and to go a little bit farther now as we end, and to come to this love. And you do talk about plants and emotions, and for those who have violent reactions to plant cognition, plant emotion is even more, I guess. I don't know,
Absolutely.
you.
Oh
Yeah.
my God. Yeah, definitely, definitely. Yeah, I mean, you have, the intelligence is a hard pill to swallow. Then you have sentience. How you mean? I mean, having their own subjective experiences. Even you know, when I say legumes go to bed.
Yeah,
They sleep
plants
tight.
can sleep and wake. That is proven, actually.
Yeah, yeah.
You
So,
can
but
anesthetize plants. This is
yeah,
incredible. Yeah.
yeah. So, but think about it. I mean, the same way we spoke of the circadian clocks and what unites us all in the tree of life. This is a way to end, I think, because here is one master key. Think of melatonin, right? So melatonin, we know it's being secreted by the pineal gland. We know what it does in mammals. And you know what happened in the 90s? When it was first seen, observed in plants, 1995. So 3-4 decades after it was identified in mammals. Scientists, plant physiologists, they couldn't see it.
Yeah. It couldn't possibly be true, even though it was exactly the same thing and
The same
obviously so.
molecule, they couldn't see it because their frame of mind, this is a great example of the theory lateness of observation.
Yeah.
So plants are not supposed to have it, thereby what I'm seeing is not melatonin,
Can't
right?
possibly be that. You don't. Yeah.
Right. But what's funny, beyond the sociology of science and how long it took it took like 8-10 more years for the Society of Plant Physiology to acknowledge it and give it a name. They added the prefix phyto, no, because
So that it seems like it's something different, but it's
yeah,
the same thing, right?
the
It's
same
exactly
thing,
the same thing.
the same thing. So, but phyto, the prefix, just because our melatonin is the good stuff. Theirs is phytomelatonin, right? But that's not the more interesting part of it is that when you see legumes folding their leaves at night, right? So the legumes they go like this, they fold their leaves when the sun sets, and then they unfolding in the morning prior to the sun setting. So it's anticipatory folding, right? So it's circadian based. So they fold them prior to the sun setting, they unfold them prior to the sun rising in the morning, right? And that's an amazing pattern. But what we don't see is that they are actually the temporal, the dynamical profile of the concentration. It peaks with sunset and then has a second peak in the middle of the night and then it wears off during the day. So the very same thing as in mammals.
Yeah. It's this
So
nervous system kind of.
yeah. So you can go to the kitchen cabinet and pick a melatonin synthetic tablet and take a pill to to ease yourself to sleep one night because you are stressed wherever you've been on your phone for too long. So we know that melatonin puts us back in sync, right? And then when you see plants with the same dynamical profile, the same concentration levels, the same wearing off during the day, and the leaves folding and unfolding, we resist the idea of them going to bed, sleeping. And we know Paco's got to be speaking metaphorically. How you mean metaphorically? This is the same idea of action potentials. You don't need neurons to fire action potentials. Plant cells fire action potentials. Doesn't need to be neuronal tissue, right? So what unites us all is already there. So sentience, love, right? So when you spoke of sentience, of subjective experiences, of course the mistake is to anthropomorphize plants and think, hey, if they experience the world, they've got to somehow experience it the way I do. I mean, for God's sake, stop, get rid of the gold standard and yourself. Imagine we don't inhabit planet Earth. So this is a good mental exercise. Imagine we travel back in time before humans or animals existed, or mammals, and you see plants. Imagine you are just a Martian scientist landing on this Earth a few million years ago. You cannot use Homo sapiens as the gold standard because we haven't evolved yet. So how would you study what that plant folding its leaves is doing and the melatonin? And so how would you study that without using yourself for the sake of comparing, for comparison purposes? That's the challenge, intellectually speaking. Wouldn't you arrive to the conclusion that they are taking a nap, that they are taking a break, that life needs to rest? Any form of life whatsoever needs to rest.
And it's back to the regularities and what we sort of started with the robot and what we can learn from plants. And if we can get out of that human stance, I think it's also about this whole trying to think like, from different perspectives. If we can get out of that human stance and do that thought experiment like you just explained, then it actually opens up a lot. It tells us a lot about what intelligence is, what cognition could be, because this plan in the space that you just described, it's going through its encounter. That's its movement, right? I would say it's moving from A to B without leaving A, but it's movement.
Yeah.
And it's developing something like melatonin as to do that. And this is an intelligent system, but it doesn't look anything like humans. But then the patterns can be connected. So you open up this nested connection. But what I think is even more important about that and what you say in your book is actually then you have to give up on anthropomorphizing the plant.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's the mistake. I think they are targeting the wrong, the type of straw man they are fighting against is not the position. I usually say, sort of in jest, I say, hey, if I was like in your food, if I was in your shoes, thinking that I'm thinking like this, like plants, like human-like, of course I would go nuts as you do. But look, that's not what I'm defending. Get rid of that comparison by default. It is you, the one who is anthropomorphizing them, and that's why you are going nuts. I would go nuts as well. Just get rid of that.
Yeah, it's
That's
actually a
not
little bit
part of my
disrespectful too to the
that's
plant.
not part of my picture. That's
No.
you're projecting you yourself, not me.
And I think that's the hard work you're doing, is trying to get people to slow down and realize that you're not saying what they've assumed that you're saying, because that's the hard work of, and at some point it'll become obvious, right? But people will start to think, they won't react in that violent way when they hear it, in the same way that some people would have reacted the same way with animal intelligence at some point. But now, because we've connected to movement, the Dalai Lama can assume that, or, but it just takes time, and it takes people kind of putting themselves out there and being criticized.
And again, education. That's why
and
education
education
is
in the way that
important.
you describe at the end of the
Because the
book.
new generations, this is not about these guys that, they might retire and never get it. It's the new generations, the people who are now in primary school, in secondary school. Those are the ones that need to understand it in this other way.
Yeah, and if they do, it opens up a better, and I would think better, but we don't have to say better, but another way of being as the world, which we really need right now.
A little bit more humility. We need to
Yeah,
be, we
humility
need to
and
be humble.
understanding self ecologically. in any other way.
Absolutely.
Just to kind of end though, I think one thing that is hard for people who do like there's the people who react violently against the anthropomorphizing, but then there's also a lot of people who want that, and that's part of the reaction of why some people in science are so violent against it, because some people want to believe that plants are speaking to them in a kind of way, and of course everything is speaking to everything, but I think what they don't want to give up about that is that there's something quite awe-inspiring and wonderful when you do start to communicate with plants, and it's hard to talk about that, and so it becomes like a cartoon kind of version of it.
Well, I say in the book, remember, they say at some point that the magic is already within the science.
Absolutely. That's what I wanted to bring that up, because you bring that up in the book, and that's a very important point. We're not giving up anything. It's becoming more wondrous. It's just
absolutely. So science, if it's not reductionist or mechanistic, already has the resources to feel the awe, the wonder.
And this kind of space of also understanding that you're looking at yourself in a way when you're looking at the plant, or the plant's looking at itself through you or something, it becomes less mystical, because it's kind of what we do with science. You brought up Patricia Churchland, and that made me think of dopamine, and we didn't have time to talk about it, but plants also have dopamine and GABA and these things.
Many neurotransmitters.
Emotion.
Well, think about it. No, it's funny actually. I'm glad you brought this before we end, because some of our critics have said, look, glutamate or GABA, that we know plants have it, is not a neurotransmitter. It's just a byproduct, a metabolic byproduct, secondary metabolite. Why? And you know what their answer is? Because this is in print. So this has been published. I mean, this is what they said. They said this cannot be a neurotransmitter in plants because the Wikipedia, they went to the Wikipedia, says that neurotransmitters relate to the idea of a synapse. So if there is not a synaptic bridge, a synapse in between neurons, you cannot have a neurotransmitter. So think about it. Instead, this is a very good point about education. So in plants, you have examples where glutamate triggers a calcium wave that spreads all over a plant and triggers a systemic response to herbivores, right? So it's a signaling, it is playing a signaling role, systemic signaling, right? So what a better example of glutamate as playing the role of a neurotransmitter than this, a signaling role, right? So they stick to the definition on grounds that have to do with looking it up at the dictionary or at the Wikipedia. And instead of saying, hey, in light of the evidence of these systemic signaling responses in plants that we find related to glutamate or GABA, let's revise our definition of neurotransmitter. In plants, it doesn't need to relate to the synapse because, of course, in plants there are no synapses. So instead of saying, hey, we need to enlarge the picture and redefine what we mean by neurotransmitter to make it more encompassing, to bring in all these non-neural guys which still exhibit systemic signaling responses. So instead of saying that, they ignore that evidence and say, no, they cannot possibly have it. It's just a metabolite. And we know GABA is not just a metabolite. The literature is there, but they want to turn a blind eye on grounds that try to stick to our privileged status of animals. No, this is an animal thing, like with melatonin. No synapse, no neurotransmission. End of the story. Instead of thinking, wow, I mean, this is systemic signaling. Let's enlarge the picture. Let's redefine those terms, because the history of science is the history of revising. You cannot do science without revising. We could be stuck with Ptolemy, thinking that everything revolves around the earth if we were not revising.
Yeah, absolutely. You unpack it really well in the book, and a lot of it seems to me to be getting stuck on, again, that you need to have a brain and that intelligence is kind of this one thing and the linear stuff, rather than understanding it could come in many different ways, and how fascinating it is that not only are there patterns shared, but there are even chemicals that like are exactly the same chemical, right? Like to me, if you once you open up this and let it be a scaled kind of intelligence, where it's not just like a plant needs to have a brain or there's some chain of going to the brain or whatever. It's very hard, but you're doing it in your book, opening the space. But then it becomes, actually, I could see those people who are criticizing it could actually improve their own research in a way, in the same way
Mhm.
that like
Absolutely.
robotics can be improved by plant intelligence. It gives you
Absolutely.
another way of thinking about it.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So this is not against anyone. This is against ignorance.
Yeah. Or just
Science
like
should
opening up
work.
the space, right? In the way that you talk about in the education part,
Absolutely.
which is learning a new way of thinking, I think, in the
Mm,
same way that you're presenting at the
definitely.
beginning.
And we need adversarial collaboration. So it's good to have the skeptics on board. Not we against them or them against us. This is all of us teaming up together against ignorance. That's what propels science. Revising without apology. You don't need to apologize for noticing or discovering or unearthing that things were not the way we thought. Sorry, the earth is not at the center of anywhere. I mean, we are just
Yeah,
a speckle, modesty, humility. Anyway.
exactly. And this is a very hard question, but I did find myself thinking about it because this is called love and philosophy. And so it's interesting the way we can think about, you do talk about emotions and plants in a way, and in a very non-dramatic, easy to access understanding of it in the book. I'll just leave it to people, but it kind of became, I don't know how to think about love in plants, you know? It's hard. Is it like, I mean, I could think of it in a very mystical way of just the plant and the sunlight are in love with each other, and that's that process in a way. Or I could think of it as my love, the way that I in relation with the plant, or it's relational somehow, but I don't know. What do you think? Can this word even be brought up, or?
I I wouldn't have any problem with that. Again, if we unpack it in a way that is not, doing a disservice, as in when we say plants go to bed, sleep tight, they are not, of course, you don't go and
No, no, they're
sleep
not
tight.
tucking each other into little
So,
beds,
but
right?
but but if you put in terms of energy flows, the idea of a good vibe, being in good terms with your surroundings, in terms
Some
of,
kind of symbiosis or something,
yeah,
or
and energy, and if you think of all the sensory channels in plants, and the parameter space that the stuff they are able to sense and respond to, electromagnetic fields and king, non-king, parental relations. So all the things they go through in their meaning making, of course, part of the story has got to do with a good vibe. Good, hey, this is good news to me. I feel comfy. I feel bad. I feel good about it. So this is good. This is good. I mean, that's something that shouldn't be at odds because it boils down to biochemistry. I mean, the same way that you are identifying these hormones and these neurotransmitters. So love speaks the language of molecules. What's wrong with that? Uh, again, you don't miss anything by speaking that language. You reveal the magic in the science itself. Chemically speaking, plants speak an amazing language of chemicals. Volatiles, compounds, airborne compounds, bringing news, sharing news. I mean, they need each other. They need other plants, king and non-king, other organisms belonging to different kingdoms. How come they are not gonna, we cannot trade in. So as long as we don't personify it in human terms, why not? I mean,
yeah.
it's part of what makes the world go round, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I think that in the same way you were talking about when we think about the synapse and all of this, like we really have to put it in a kind of lineage always. That if we're talking about this kind of human cognition, then yes, we're thinking about brains and synapses, or if we're talking about plants, it's a different lineage, and you have to look at the whole thing and then not smush them together. And
Mm,
why wouldn't that also be true for something like
mm.
thinking about what love might be?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think that things are easier if we remove ourselves from the picture. Then things get way easier. Like,
Yeah. But to
Mm.
put you right back in the picture for the last question, the very last question is, you've been putting a lot of your life into this. People criticize it. People also love it. But, well, I mean, there's a lot of criticism, but there's also a lot of
A bit of everything, yeah.
success. Yeah. But I do wonder, has it brought some kind of love into your life? I mean, do you ever have that kind of a feeling when you are in your garden
Absolutely.
or, yeah, with your work?
Well, definitely, definitely. Look, for one thing, it's true this Darwinian idea of slowing down. I mean, when I started, look, right here, this attic, let's see if you can see it, this
Oh, yeah.
attic right
Yeah.
there, that
Looks like nice wood.
takes me to the attic. Well, that's where I started time-lapsing vines prior to setting up the lab on campus, right? So that was when I started as a sort of amateur, playing Darwin, so to speak. Literally, actually,
Continuing Darwin.
I brought all my Darwin to the attic. It's still there, all Darwin, all botany books, and I was playing there, and for the sake of it, for the sake of the joy, having fun, literally. And I did that, this exercise of stop time lapsing and watch them to the naked eye. And you can't imagine how rewarding that was, because I would sit on a stool for few hours. Some people are going to think I'm crazy, but they are faster that you can think of. I mean, when we say they are so slow, well, in a sense they are, but they are way faster than we think. So if you take a climbing beam, Phaseolus vulgaris, and you sit and watch it revolve, it goes, a whole circle, whole revolution in less than an hour, 50 minutes, an hour. I mean, people watch a film for 2 hours, and if they like the film, time flies. Well, time flew for me watching the climbing beam. I mean, and really, every time I think about it, I feel that, eh, eh, I felt something that I knew I wasn't getting from the time-lapse observations. I knew that the animation, the acceleration through time-lapse, assembling the footage, was in a sense an artifact. And I knew that to the naked eye, I was getting the real thing. That took me in my own garden. I live in the outskirts in the house with an orchard, so I have my orange trees or my lemon olive trees or like Mediterranean orchard.
Mm.
And now I have these weeds, the ones that you would pluck and pluck and pluck. Now I let them do their job, and I have actually even assembled some time lapse in my orchard, and I
Oh,
time
wow.
lapse them. So
You
I've
just
been time
let the weeds
lapsing.
go.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
great.
I've been time lapsing my weeds. Now I have this weed that has grown huge and is doing its mess on the olive tree. And I'm getting this perspective of 20 because I've been living here for the last 24 years. Um, so 24 years is a decent amount of time to give you some perspective in terms of how the orchard has been growing and which trees have been, having to
Mhm.
compete for a space with others, who has been doing what. So for example, my cacti, Mediterranean weather. So cacti are a big thing. I love cacti. So at the beginning, when you get started, you want to push them to give them a little help, extra help, right, to your plants. When you're gardening, oh, like, and then I realized, no, I planted like, like 80 different cacti, right? 80 different species, 20 plus years ago. And I didn't do anything to them, nothing. So summer came, 40s, for weeks, months, hell, I wouldn't water them. I wouldn't do
Wow.
anything to them. Most of them died. But those that survived, you wouldn't believe it, the size they have. I mean, I have some of them are taller than the olive trees.
Wow.
I have never done
That's
anything to
amazing.
them. So we are obsessed with, when we think of caring about our plants, we can't help to anthropomorphize our care and think that the pruning, we have to prune them, we have to add nutrient, we have to water them, we have to provide, and we don't realize that we are not that special. And that to me was a message of Planta Sapiens, to realize that we are not that special. We need them, but they don't need us. In fact, they do way better when we don't care about them. So when you look at my plants in my orchard, the ones that are doing great are the ones that were meant to do great, because they don't need to be spoiled by me. And I get joy, getting to your question, I get joy out of realizing how unnecessary I am to them. We are not that important.
That's very beautiful. It actually opens up your book in a new way too, slowing down and almost plant bathing or plant being, just being with them and not trying to
Yeah,
be
yeah,
important to them.
yeah,
It's a
that's it.
whole
That's
other
it.
kind of practice.
Fellow travelers, not masters.
Yeah. It's a beautiful stance to try to take. And thanks for doing it. Thanks for the book. Thanks for the talking with me and staying
Well,
with
thank you,
this.
thank
And
you. No, thank you.
it's
It
been
was
wonderful.
I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you for your interest and for doing this and everything.
Yeah, it was great.